Hi, my name is Mia Armstrong-López. I'm a managing editor at ASU Media Enterprise and one of the editors behind Future Tense Fiction, which you can read in Issues in Science and Technology. And I'm really thrilled to be joined today by Deji Bryce Olukotun. He is the author of 2 novels, and his fiction has appeared in several book collections. His novel After the Flare won the 2018 Philip K. Dick Special Citation and was chosen as one of the best books of 2017 by The Guardian and Tor.com. His short story, Between the Dark and the Dark, published in Lightspeed, was selected for Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2020. He works for a sound technology company, and Deji is also the author of Mothering the Bay, February's Future Tense fiction story. Deji, thank you so much for being here. And to start, I just want to ask you to describe in 1 or 2 sentences what Mothering the Bay is about.
Mothering the Bay is a story that is meant to convey the human experience of how AI would impact our lives in an emergency. And it follows a mother and daughter who are trying to get from San Francisco to Oakland to their home, and the role that AI plays in that experience.
Awesome. And so we're going to dig into some of those particular plot points and the setting, especially as well, in just a second. But I wanted to sort of start at the beginning, and I know that Mothering the Bay has a bit of like a multi-pronged origin stories. So to start off, before you set out to write the story, you attended a policy dinner that was hosted by Future Tense, New America, and UC Berkeley's College of Computing, Data Science, and Society. And the dinner was titled Democracy and Digital Empowerment in the Age of Deepfakes. It sort of brought together different leaders in the AI policy space, and it's part of a series of policy dinners that Future Tense Fiction is collaborating on with New America's technology and democracy programs. As a part of that series, we're sort of inviting fiction writers like you to digest and reinterpret and expand what are oftentimes behind closed doors, sort of very formal policy discussions. So tell us about that experience. What did you take away from the policy dinner, and how did it inform the story itself?
Yeah, great question. So the dinner happened right before the 2024 US presidential election. And that meant there was an air of seriousness and focus in the room. The topic was, as you said, misinformation. It was on the Berkeley campus, so kind of in that intellectual ferment, students, walking around, exploring. And it was a group of stakeholders from Berkeley itself, from ASU, and then some nonprofits and government. So it was a really nice mix of people who are all thinking about not only their own sector, but also artificial intelligence, what that means, trying to put some kind of guardrails or parameters around it so it could be a good discussion. And it was a really wide-ranging conversation. There were moments that were kind of funny as people were exploring different topics. And also, I would say seriousness, because AI is here. It has lots of opportunities, but there are also lots of threats, and misinformation is one of them. I think there's an anxiety around work, trying to understand the balance between the hype machine. So we're supposed to celebrate these technologies and the reality of people's lived experiences.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for walking us through that. And it sounds like sort of it's a really expansive topic, and there's lots of sort of alleys or paths that you could walk down from it. So what led you to the specific themes in the story? So the story sort of explores information bubbles and how we consume information in the wake of an emergency, and maybe how AI can distort or frame that and distort or frame our ability to sort of perceive reality or interpret it for ourselves. So what led you to that theme in particular?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think in these settings, in this workshop setting, which I absolutely love, where you get a bunch of very smart, passionate people together who bring something to the table. I literally try to think about what is each person conveying right now and how can I depict that in a fiction story. So I can't capture all the precise details, but I can remember moments and I can remember points that they've repeated over time. There were several folks who felt very passionately that our best protection against AI is to make sure that people understand it and how it works. There were other people who were more focused on having access to the technology for everyone, making sure that it's evenly distributed. Um, there were other people thinking about more on the kind of electoral side. What does it mean? And then there were plenty of people who were just anxious and had lots of questions and few answers. They'd seen what AI could do in their own personal context. Something that didn't make it into the story was one of the professors in the room saying that he had a graduate level physics problem that he had to do when he was studying for his PhD. It took him 3 days. That was kind of the normal amount of time that it takes for this particular problem, and how one of the large language models solved it in, I think, 75 seconds. And just, so there's that kind of reeling with what are the possibilities? What does this mean? And, again, my role was to take some of that. And because this is a policy oriented discussion, what are some of the solutions? We know the anxiety, but what are some of the solutions that have been presented in the room, not my own solutions, but what were presented in the room? And how can I depict that in a fictional way?
Yeah, and I wanna dig into some more of those themes and the way that they're reflected into the story. But I first wanted to ask you about the setting, because it's something that I found really fascinating. Right, as you mentioned, the story plays out. A mother and a daughter are the protagonists, and it plays out over the course of a train ride. They're trying to get from San Francisco back to Oakland, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Kind of Oakland, Berkeley area. And it came from, I landed at SFO airport and I could have taken a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft. And I was like, no, my wife was really into public transportation. I'm going to try the BART. I used to ride it all the time, but it had been a bit while. So I took it and I just enjoyed that experience of watching people get on and off the train, the cultural, decisions about riding the BART, where you sit. I lived in New York for 12 years, so it was kind of a muscle memory coming back. And then just, that feeling of movement. You're moving between different communities and neighborhoods. And for folks who spend a lot of time in the car, the subway or the BART is very democratic in the sense that you don't choose who you're in the car with. You have a little bit of choice. So it was that inspired it. I wrote it myself. It felt very local. That gave me a way to anchor the story. And crazy things can happen on the subway. You never know what's going to happen. So that was kind of the origin of it. I'll just speak for a minute to the mother-daughter relationship. I've had some friends who've participated in foster care, been in foster care, and started families that way or helped raise children that way. And it's a really unique and courageous experience. So I wanted to depict that, and that this mother and daughter are, they know each other a little bit, but now they've just formalized their relationship, and the adoption has taken hold, and they're crossing the bay with this new experience in mind, that they are now in a committed relationship. So that I was trying to anchor the human side of the story. And I think just getting back to the dinner we spoke about, the idea of equitable access to AI and these technologies, you could see, I thought the foster care system is a really nice kind of way of how would that be incorporated? How would something like AI be incorporated into a system to take care of more vulnerable folks? And that was the reason for that particular angle.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, because there's sort of in my reading of the story, there were sort of two main tension points, and surrounding AI. So the first sort of tension point is Louisa, who is the mom, and Simone, who is the newly adopted daughter, get on the train, and as you're saying, Simone has not really interacted with this AI technology before, because the foster care system had really sort of shielded her from it. And so she hops on this train where everyone is interacting with these AI agents and is being advertised to by AI, and it's sort of a whole new world for Simone. And so she's forced to kind of digest all of that and interpret all of that with the help of Luisa, who is someone who largely like opts out of this AI agent filled world. So that's sort of a first tension that we see of like, what does it look like to be suddenly immersed into this really overwhelming AI technology world? And then sort of the second tension point that we see is there's an emergency that happens on the train, right? So when the train is traveling under the bay, it suddenly stops, and there's sort of this flurry to figure out what has gone on, right? Like, was it a bomb? Was it some sort of an attack? Was it a natural disaster? Was it a mechanical issue? Did the train hit someone? Did the train hit something? And sort of AI is distorting those narratives and this quest to figure out what happened as well. So I'm just curious, why set up sort of that emergency or natural disaster? Like, how does that sort of setting change the way that we consume information? And what did you want to explore with that in the story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you ride public transportation, it's an act of faith in government and in your sort of taxes and in other people that you are ceding control to the state and to get from point A to point B. And I think when you ride the subway in New York or whatever city, you feel that. After a while, you forget about it. It's just what you do. But there's an act of faith, and anyone who's been rode the subway enough or the BART, there are moments where they break down or they pause, and you have to have faith that it will be resolved in a safe way. At the same time, you're going to be stuck on the train with the people who are there, and you don't have much control over that. So I think that's that's kind of the backdrop there. The emergency was, as we were sitting around that dinner, I remember there was a lot of question about how do you get to the root of the thing? How do you understand what's factual and what's not? And you would think that a natural disaster or an emergency would be as objective as you can get. And that everyone would understand what would have happened by using their intuition, their knowledge, their power of observation. But at the way we set up the story is that people are very dependent on their virtual agents. So this is a term that gets bandied about. It used to be called virtual assistant. Now they call it agent. It depends on where the hype machine is wants to call the technology to make it more adaptable and friendly. So there's a dependency, and these agents, they're using them because they are providing some value to them. So everyone has one, and they're very personalized. So the passengers are trying to understand what happens when there's a big, loud kind of explosion and moment. They're trying to understand what it was. Was it something on the tracks? Was it this or that? And they quickly realize that their agents are not having the same interpretation. Some of them are more logical. Some of the agents help say, oh, it could be this, this, or that. Can you check for this? They're trying to sort of help the person, navigate. But other ones are having a different interpretation. And still other people just want to watch their videos or play pick their fantasy football sports draft. So what should be an objective situation, because they're literally in a tunnel when this happens under the bay, is not. And so the mother and daughter, Simone and Luisa, need to navigate this and try to understand. And Luisa feels some responsibility to help her daughter through this situation, especially since she's now her mom officially. So it's a lot of responsibility, and yet she doesn't know either. So they have to kind of work through it and figure out what happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's sort of like a central paradox, right? Because as you're mentioning, a lot of people in the wake of this emergency are turning to their AI agents to try and get more information about what happened. But in leaning on that tool, they're actually like leaning away from more like integral tools that we might think about, like our own capacity to see and observe and deduce and make decisions based on that. And it's interesting because Louisa really wants Simone to sort of lean into those more natural instincts, right? So in the wake of the disaster, there are sort of three people on the train who, rather than turning to their AI agents, lean on these tools of observation and experience. And you write, those speaking of those three people, Rose and Henry and the uke player represented the world that Louisa wanted Simone to know, one where you observed and learned and decided for yourself. So I just wanted to ask you, like, in your own experience with AI in our world, like, how does AI and technology more broadly potentially erode our ability to observe and decide for ourselves, and what might like resisting that sort of erosion look like?
Yeah, that was one of the themes of the dinner. And let me just tell a personal story. So a couple months ago, I was asleep and my family was asleep, and the building, our building shook. And it sounded like a giant, like a huge bookshelf had slammed down onto the ground, or maybe something had crashed into it. Got out, talked to the neighbors. No one knew what had happened. And no one knew how to find out what would happen. It wasn't on Twitter or X. It wasn't on any of the social media platforms. And it turns out we were asking the wrong question. We all felt it was an earthquake. It wasn't an earthquake. It is actually a sonic boom from a rocket launch. So it's a moment where you would think we could figure it out. We're smart people, but our sort of field of, awareness and like what was possible was just too limited. We didn't even know how to ask the question because it was the kind of thing that didn't show up on an emergency responder alert or an earthquake alert. So it was just some phenomenon that we didn't understand, and only found out the next day what it had been. And so you think that in these moments we would all know exactly what was going on, but we don't. And I think getting back to the theme of the dinner of trying to understand how the technology works. Now, I think I've worked in digital rights, and for many years, I work in the tech space today. There will be some people who will understand how AI works at a basic fundamental level, and that will give them knowledge and power over their use of it. But most people, in my view, will not know. And as the tools evolve and become more sophisticated, our ability to understand exactly how they work becomes more limited. There's certain, as we know with LLMs, there's certain, you can keep the data as clean as you want and everything like that, but there's certain inability. It's like a one-way mirror where you cannot see what is happening underneath. You have to have faith, and you can see the results of the way it works, but you can't necessarily know exactly how it made a decision or why. And I think, so my view is that while there will be those people who are very educated and know how it works and can help shape those tools, there's going to be a lot of people who don't know, and they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, or they're just not interested. So the story touches on that group of people, which I think is most people. I think that's most people. And I think, what would you do? And what it celebrates in the end is knowledge, personal experience, and the ability to observe. What did you smell? What did you see? What did someone you trust say? And use kind of basic intuition and facts. And then you ultimately have to have faith that that's the right decision. As unsatisfying as that can be, because you want to sometimes just know whether something is true or not true, there will come moments, I believe, where you will have to have faith in your fellow human beings and in your own knowledge and experience. To live alongside AI, they're not oppositional. They can support each other and complement each other, and AI could easily help you become better at observing for yourself. But in this moment where we left out the part that the AI agents are not connected to the internet, that makes it a little different. So that was kind of one of the core kind of questions of the story. Where do you go when the most factual and tangible things are not in front of you, and you have to kind of still work it out, puzzle it out.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think it reminds me, as you were telling your story, of like not even knowing what question to ask, right? Like it's like we have to use observation and also imagination to expand this universe of like questions to ask and possibilities to be able to comprehend, and then at the same time to have this sort of faith to then exist in like a little bit of uncertainty, like a little bit of not being connected constantly to the answers. So thank you so much, Deji, for being willing to talk to me about your story. I think we could talk about it for much longer, but we'll keep it at that for now. And you can read the full story, Mothering the Bay, along with an accompanying expert response essay and some really beautiful art in Issues in Science and Technology at www.issues.org. Thank you so much.